Hey, Tony Gassens here. Gotta forgive me. I didn't get a chance to turn my light on, and my feet is in water. My feet in water soaking, and I ordered this little thing, soak your feet in. And I wanted to touch on this. This part of the marriage series. This for the marriage series. If you're in a relationship, then it can work for you too. But this really for the marriage series. And one thing we have to understand in marriage is we gotta be okay. We gotta get to the point that we are okay with feedback. We're okay with critique. We're okay with questioning. We're okay with having hard conversations. Because the only way a marriage is gonna survive is if you are not afraid to confront one another. If you are afraid of your spouse and you're afraid to ask a question, you're afraid to speak your mind, you're afraid to ask that something be done differently, then your marriage is gonna fail. And it's gonna fail because you're going to eventually harbor resentment. And that resentment is going to affect your personality. It's going to affect your attitude. It's going to affect the way you carry yourself, the way you talk to your partner, the way you talk to your kids, the way you act on your job. And it's going to affect your life, and it's going to cost you greatly. So we have to get to the place to where we are okay with tough conversations. Having those tough conversations, asking those questions, and you got to be able to, in a time of peace. So you got to pick the right time. So let's say on a Saturday or a Sunday, and you're going to be home all day. That would be a better time to have a tough conversation than, let's say, on the way to your date. See, a lot of times we'll look and we say, oh, well, I'm alone with my spouse. We headed out to eat. We headed out, to do something. While we got this time in the car, let me go ahead and bring this topic up. You bring the topic up, and then it ruins your whole night, because nobody likes confrontation. Nobody likes to be questioned. Nobody likes to be asked something. And we have to realize that. And so you got to choose the right timing. In a time of peace, you prepare for war. And so when you think about this and you start to process this, now you know that you got to be very selective in when you bring up certain topics. The other thing you have to do is you got to be mindful of your spouse. You got to understand and really pay attention to the communication style of your spouse. And if you know your spouse is not really a communicator, if your spouse kind of runs from tough conversations, ducks and hides, then you got to take that into consideration. And you got to bring up a conversation in a way to where it's a safe space. If you know your spouse shows their feelings on their face and you getting ready to be out in public, then you got to take that in consideration. And so you have to look at, if you understand and you know that your spouse is high strung and maybe the type that if a conversation gets real, their voice gets a little louder, or they want to stand up, they want to get animated, then you got to create a different space. It may be when you sitting down on the couch, when you seated somewhere, or let's say you're going to be riding and you riding to a place where it's just going to be you and your spouse. And when y'all get there, and you got about an hour till you get there. And then when you get there, you're going to have some time to kind of cool off, calm down, before you around people or what have you. You got to be strategic in this. And then in the conversation, you got to be willing to express yourself. You got to express yourself. And while you're expressing yourself, you have to be able to express yourself without yelling, without cursing, without name calling. But you got to be very real. And that's one of the things that I see that ruin marriages is we're not being real with each other. And we're just kind of biting our tongue and tucking our tail, and we're not being real. And when you're not real with your spouse, then you can't really be real with yourself. You can't be real with anybody. So now you live in this lie. You live in a fake existence, and that's going to cost you. So you got to get to the place to where you can be real, but you're not being real in a way to hurt your spouse. You're not trying to hurt your spouse. You ain't trying to cause no damage. You're trying to bring healing. You having a real conversation that can bring about some clarity, some new direction for the relationship, to strengthen the relationship so that y'all can continue to get along and continue to flourish. But the problem that we often face is not having a safe space to communicate and not being willing to talk to each other in a way that can bring about some healing and some clarity. And we got to get to that place, because if you unwilling to have this conversation, you unwilling to talk to each other, then you cannot grow. And what you have to realize is that, remember what I always say, communication to a relationship is like oxygen to life. Communication to a relationship is like oxygen to life. So you got to realize and understand that if you cannot communicate, then your relationship is suffocating. And if it is suffocating, guess what? Your relationship will eventually die. So you have to be able to come to a place that you can be real with your partner. And the conversations, you want to make sure that you are talking to yourself first. You got to talk to yourself first, and you got to look at yourself from the outside looking in. And you got to be hard on yourself. You got to be real with yourself. You got to be direct with yourself, and you got to say, what don't I do that I need to be doing? And if I start doing this, what do I need my spouse to do? So I'm going to start doing this, and I'm going to let my spouse know I'm going to start doing this, but I also will need this from my spouse. So I'm going to let my spouse know this is what I need. And so you have to be that way, because if you're not hard on yourself, then you're going to see yourself as just like this perfect little angel. And then you're going to see your spouse as a nuisance. And you're going to see your spouse as a user and a taker. And you're going to feel like you doing all this, and your spouse isn't doing anything. And so you're going to be, singing your praises, tooting your horn, while resenting your husband or your wife. And that's one thing that you don't want to get caught up doing. But it got to be equal. It got to go both ways. Both have to be equally invested, and both got to be helping, and both have to be engaged. And one of the things that we have to do is we got to be willing. We got to be willing to admit when we're wrong. You got to be willing to say sorry. You got to be willing to, really backtrack if you did something wrong, said something wrong. Love is being able to apologize. If you can't apologize, then you're not really showing love. And then you also, at the same time, you have to make sure that you're not apologizing for things you shouldn't have to apologize for. So just because your spouse got their feelings hurt, or got in their feelings, it doesn't mean that you did something wrong, because the truth hurts and no one likes correction. So if my wife needs something from me and she addresses something that I'm not doing, I might get salty and get in my feelings. But if she goes and she says, "Hey, I'm sorry for, calling you out about being on your phone too much. I shouldn't have said anything." And then I'm gonna be like, "Oh, okay, all right, you done took that back, so I ain't got to make no changes." When in actuality, I should have made changes. I'm supposed to make changes on that because I'm wrong in that area and I need to do better. But because I got salty and I got quiet and I got in my feelings, that could make her feel like she did or said something wrong and like she was too hard on me, when she just was being real. She was trying to protect the health of the relationship. And that's just a random example, but that's a very real example in relationships. And it's not a random example. It's an example that I've gone through, but not in that way, not to where I got silent and my wife apologized. But when we've had conversations in our relationship, what you need from me from her, it was, I need you to put your phone down. Put your phone down, start reading all them comments, start reading all them emails, and be present, be locked in. And if I talk to my wife, well, hey, I need this right here. And so neither one of us want to hear what the other person need in reality, because it makes us feel inadequate. Like every one of us as humans, we have this idea that we want to be everything to our partner. We want to be everything they need. But in reality, we might not be able to be everything. And so to hear, I need this, and it's going to require that I get out of my comfort zone and that I'm conscious about my effort and what I'm doing, that's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to stretch me. It's going to push me. It's going to challenge me. And we don't necessarily welcome that or invite that. We'll accept it, but we're not necessarily asking for it. And so this is something we got to think about and be mindful of. And this is one of the things that I realized too, is in a lot of relationships, in a lot of marriages, you have someone who is a communicator and you have someone who isn't a communicator. What you have to be careful of, if you're the communicator, you have to be careful that you're not always pointing the finger and that you're not always asking for excellence and perfection from your spouse, but not requiring the same of yourself. Or you can't require the same of yourself. The same isn't being required of you because your spouse isn't a communicator. So whatever you give, your spouse may put up with it and just love you for who you are, where you are, and how you are. But then you going to your spouse because you're a communicator and you're saying, hey, I need this, I need this, I need this, I need this. So then it becomes this one-sided love to where the spouse is working, trying to win the favor and approval of you, but you're not doing the same for the spouse because they're not communicating, or they don't have the ability or the desire to communicate and tell you, I need this, I need this. And they may be being more emotionally intelligent and seeking to understand, then be understood, and appreciating your flaws and your imperfections as if they were perfect, as if your flaws are your perfection. And whereas you're looking at their flaws and you're magnifying their flaws, and then you going to them, change this, change this, change this, change that. And so this is something you got to think about. And you have to look and say, okay, I would like my spouse to be this way or be that way. But if my spouse is that way, does that mean he or she would like me to be that way as well? And if I'm not that way and my spouse isn't asking me to be that way, that means my spouse is allowing me to be how I am and who I am. So if I'm asking my spouse to change who they are then I'm asking them to do something that they're not asking me, and is that fair? So think on this. God bless you. We'll talk soon. Somebody at my door.